The day my son told me, "Dad, we can't buy your cancer medicine," I smiled and told him I understood. I didn't want him to see how badly those words hurt. But that same weekend, I saw him standing beside a brand new $95,000 pickup truck he had bought for his father-in-law. I stood there smiling while something inside me quietly broke. I had spent my entire life putting my family first, and now my medicine was apparently too expensive, while a luxury truck was somehow affordable. If you enjoy emotional family stories with shocking twists and powerful life lessons, subscribe to Behind Dad, because what happened 3 days later revealed a truth I never expected. And before we continue, a quick note. The pictures shown throughout this video are creative visual dramatizations made to represent the story. They are not real photographs of the people or events. My name is James Carter. I'm 71 years old. After my wife, Linda, passed away, my son Michael became the person I trusted most. I raised him alone for several years after Linda became sick, working long hours as a construction supervisor so he could finish college. I never complained about the sacrifices. Watching him build a good life was enough for me. When I eventually became sick myself, I believed my son would stand beside me the way I had always stood beside him. My doctor prescribed a medication that helped control my condition, but it was expensive. I had enough savings to cover part of it, but not everything. One afternoon, I called Michael and asked if he could help me with the remaining amount. He was silent for several seconds before saying, "Dad, we can't buy your cancer medicine. We have too many bills." I felt embarrassed for even asking. I told him not to worry and promised I would figure something out. That weekend, I drove past a dealership and saw Michael standing outside with his wife and her father, Richard. A huge black pickup truck sat behind them with a giant red bow across the hood. Michael handed Richard the keys while everyone cheered. The price tag was nearly $95,000. I sat inside my car watching from a distance. I didn't confront anyone. I simply drove home and forced myself to keep smiling. 3 days later, someone knocked on my front door. It was Richard. He looked nothing like the happy man from the dealership photos. His face was pale and his hands were trembling. He quietly stepped inside, pulled a sealed envelope from his coat and placed it in front of me. Then he looked directly into my eyes and whispered, "James, please read this before your son comes home. After you see what's inside, you'll understand why I couldn't keep that truck." I stared at the sealed envelope for several seconds before opening it. My hands were trembling, partly because I was afraid of what I might find, and partly because I already knew it couldn't be good. Richard sat across from me in silence. When I finally unfolded the first page, I saw bank statements, dealership documents, and copies of financial transfers. My stomach tightened when I recognized the account number. It was connected to money my late wife, Linda, had left behind for my medical care. I looked at Richard and whispered, "Where did Michael get this money?" Richard lowered his head. He told me the truth had been discovered only after the truck purchase. Michael hadn't paid for the $95,000 pickup with his regular income. He had transferred money from an account that Linda created years earlier. The account was supposed to remain untouched until I needed serious medical treatment. Somehow, Michael had gained access to it and quietly moved the money. I felt my chest tighten. The medicine wasn't something I wanted for comfort. I needed it because my doctor had warned me that delaying treatment could make my condition much worse. Yet Michael had looked me in the eyes and told me there was no money. All along, there had been money. It simply wasn't being used for me. Richard wiped his eyes before explaining why he had come. He said Michael had surprised him with the truck, but after receiving the paperwork, Richard became uncomfortable. He asked where such a large amount of money had come from. Michael apparently told him, "Dad won't need that account much longer anyway." Those words terrified Richard. He immediately contacted the bank and discovered the transfers. The dealership was informed, and Richard refused to keep the truck. But before returning it, he asked the dealership for copies of every payment record. Those documents were now inside the envelope. Then Richard handed me a second piece of paper. It was a letter from Linda, written shortly before she died. I recognized her handwriting immediately. My eyes filled with tears as I read her words. She had created a protected medical fund and instructed an attorney to make sure the money could only be used for my care. She had even written that if anyone tried to divert those funds, the attorney should be contacted immediately. I covered my face and cried. Linda had been gone for years, yet somehow she had still managed to protect me. Richard quietly said, "James, your son doesn't know I found this letter." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was attorney Daniel Brooks. His voice was serious. "James, please come to my office tomorrow morning. Your wife's documents reveal something even bigger than the truck, and Michael must not know we've found it yet." That night I barely slept. Linda's letter sat beside her wedding photograph, and I kept rereading the same sentence. Protect James, even if he cannot protect himself. I cried quietly because those words sounded like Linda was sitting beside me. For the first time since my diagnosis, I wasn't afraid of what might happen to me. I was afraid of what my own son had already done. The next morning I met attorney Daniel Brooks. Richard was there waiting for me. Daniel opened a thick file containing bank records, emails, dealership documents, and copies of Michael's messages. Then he showed me something that made my hands go cold. Michael had been planning the truck purchase for nearly 2 months. During that time, he had repeatedly told me he couldn't help with my medicine because he was financially struggling. Daniel then showed me several messages between Michael and a financial advisor. One message said, "Dad won't question the withdrawals, he trusts me." Another discussed moving money from Linda's protected medical account into a temporary account before paying for the truck. I stared at the screen without speaking. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, but there was no misunderstanding anymore. Then Daniel placed a small digital recorder on the desk. Richard explained that he had accidentally recorded a conversation with Michael after the truck was delivered. Daniel pressed play. Michael's voice filled the room. "Once the truck is paid for, Dad won't know where the money came from. Besides, his treatment is expensive. We can't keep throwing money at it." I closed my eyes. Hearing my son say those words was worse than seeing the bank records. I had spent years teaching him that a person's life mattered more than money. Somehow, he had forgotten every lesson. Richard looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "James, I returned the truck this morning. I couldn't accept something purchased with money meant to keep you alive." I thanked him, but I couldn't find the right words. He had done what my own son should have done. Daniel then opened Linda's final trust document. It contained a condition she had added shortly before her death. If anyone used my medical fund for personal luxury, that person would immediately lose access to the family trust and could be required to repay every dollar. Daniel told me the bank had already frozen the account and notified the proper authorities. Then he looked at me seriously. "Michael believes he's coming here tomorrow to ask you to sign another financial document. He thinks you're still unaware of everything." I looked down at Linda's photograph and felt something change inside me. I had spent days wondering how I would confront my son. Now I realized I didn't need revenge. I only needed the truth to speak for itself. Tomorrow, Michael was going to walk into this office believing he had fooled everyone. He had no idea his father's future, and his own carefully built life, were about to change forever. The next morning, Michael walked into Daniel's office carrying a folder and wearing the same confident smile I had known since he was a boy. He hugged me and said, "Dad, let's get this paperwork finished so you don't have to worry anymore." I looked at him and felt a strange mixture of love and heartbreak. A part of me still wanted to protect him, but another part knew that protecting someone from the consequences of their choices only teaches them to repeat those choices. Daniel placed the bank records, Linda's protected trust documents, the dealership paperwork, and Richard's statement on the table. Michael's smile slowly disappeared. He tried to explain that the truck was a gift and that everything was complicated. Then Daniel pressed play on the recorder. Michael's own voice filled the room. "Once the truck is paid for, Dad won't know where the money came from." Michael froze. Richard looked at him and said quietly, "I returned the truck. I couldn't accept a gift that could have cost your father his health." Michael's face turned pale. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I was going to put the money back." I nodded slowly. "Maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but you already made the decision that my medicine could wait while someone else received a $95,000 truck." He lowered his head and began to cry. I wanted to shout. I wanted to ask how he could do this after everything I had sacrificed for him, but when I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "Michael, I don't hate you. I'm just heartbroken that you became someone who could make this choice." The legal process began immediately. The medical account was fully restored, the truck purchase was canceled, and Michael lost control of the family trust. Every unauthorized withdrawal had to be repaid. Most importantly, my medication was finally purchased. My doctor later told me that getting back on treatment when I did had prevented a much more serious situation. Months passed. Michael didn't ask me for forgiveness right away. Instead, he started showing up with groceries, fixing things around the house, and quietly checking whether I needed anything. One afternoon he sat beside me and said, "Dad, I finally understand. I was so busy trying to look successful that I forgot who helped me become successful." I forgave him, but I told him trust would have to be rebuilt slowly. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It simply gives people a chance to become better. I keep Linda's letter beside my bed now. It reminds me that real love doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it leaves a document behind, waits patiently, and protects you when you need it most. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that a parent's life should never be treated as less valuable than money or possessions. Thank you for listening to my story on Behind Dad. And remember this lesson. A $95,000 truck can be replaced, but a parent's trust and precious time can never be bought back.